Hi, this video is going to show you how to set up Azure SSIS Integration Runtime in the Azure Cloud for running packages designed with Visual Studio. To get started, first we're going to need to create an Azure storage account. You can do this by searching for it on the Azure portal within the marketplace, and this will give you access to the Microsoft storage account. So simply click the Create button, and you can then choose your subscription, and you can create a resource group to save all of your related data factories and integrations and storage accounts. Give it a name, and then obviously you can also choose the region that you want to save it to. So if you're in the US or the UK, you can choose the appropriate region. Choose the performance. In this example I'm just going to choose standard, and I'm not going to choose any redundancy either, just go for the basics. I'm not interested in modifying any of these default settings. I'm happy to just go with the suggested options. For your particular usage case, you can obviously choose the appropriate options here. For networking, I'm just going to go with all of the defaults, because I'm not bothered about security, because this is just purely a sample test that I'm going to do. So when you're happy with all of the options that you've chosen, it'll obviously validate the things you've selected, and then you can just click the Create button, and that will then create the Azure storage account, and it will deploy it within your Azure portal. The actual deployment shouldn't take too long. It's fairly straightforward. And once done, you'll be able to select the storage account within the portal itself. There we go, it's now completed. So we just need to go to the resource, and this is where you can obviously create the appropriate containers within your storage. There's also the Storage Explorer. You can actually download a version of this as an application to run on Windows, or you can just use the web-based version as well. Now, for the KingswaySoft, we need to be able to store the installation packages. So what we're doing here is we're creating a blob container where we can put the packages in, and we're also going to create a file share. Now, the file share is where we're going to actually save our developed SSIS packages. So we're just creating a file share here with an appropriate name, and they're currently both empty at the moment. But obviously we will populate these with the appropriate files that we required, as you can see here. Now then, the storage account itself, to be able to access it within the various platforms that we're going to be using, we need to get our access keys. So here I'm just copying the appropriate storage account name, the user, which the user is actually the name of the account, and we're going to copy the access key as well. So copy that to the clipboard, and then we can paste it into this script. Now, this script itself is the main installation script for KingswaySoft. So this is the script that's going to be placed in the blob container, and this script will be used when the SSIS runtime is started. And what it does, it installs the KingswaySoft applications. It will request a license key. In this instance, we've commented out the license key, and we're just going to request a trial, and it's also going to add in the credentials for that storage account at the bottom. Now then, once we've created that main command script, what we can do, we can upload it to the SSIS Kingsway blob container. So here we've got a folder with all of the appropriate files. So we're going to install here the Dynamics 365 plugins, the SharePoint ones, and the productivity pack. And it also needs the license manager as well, so that it can obviously call back to KingswaySoft servers and retrieve an appropriate license. So once those files have been uploaded, that is in effect our startup procedure for when we create the Azure SSIS Integration Runtime. Now then, to be able to access this in PowerShell scripts, what we need a shared access signature. So here I'm actually creating the signature itself. This basically gives you the various tokens and the URLs to actually access the file storage areas, so the file share and the blob container. You can obviously set the expiry date and time. You can choose if there's only specific IP addresses that are accessed, and so on. Here I'm going to select which resources that using these keys can access, and when you click the generate SAS and connection string buttons, this is where you will get all of the appropriate information that you need. So these need to be copied and saved somewhere safe. Now then, this is the initializations PowerShell script, and what you do here, you basically populate the variables at the top to indicate what your subscription is, what the resource group name is going to be, the name of your data factory, and the various configuration parameters for the SSIS runtime. Now the line there for the script container SAS URL, this is the URL that you need to use to actually access the startup scripts. So you need to populate that from the access keys that you've created. And what this script basically does, it will actually instantiate the data factory. It will then also create the integration runtime, and then it will actually start the integration runtime with all of the appropriate parameters. So this basically is your configuration script that will actually create all the appropriate pieces. You can obviously do all of this manually by going through the Azure portal, but it's a lot easier to have this script which you can then reuse and rerun to reconfigure or set things up. So obviously running this, it's going to ask for the password for your Azure account, so you just pop it into the box, and it's going to start provisioning all of the information that you need. So it'll create the data factory, it will create the SSIS runtime, it will start it, and as part of that process it will also then run the Kingsway installation script. Now in the comments section of this video I'll include the links to the official Kingsway guide, which has samples of these scripts which you can use to modify them. Now obviously this process will take a while, so we're going to skip ahead. So within this interface you can see how it's currently getting configured. It's created the data factory, and if we go into the back to the script, obviously you can see it's still got a long way to go. This process generally takes about 30 minutes to create and start the runtime. So if you go into the author and monitor section, this is where you obviously do all of the main work for the data factory, but this will allow us to see the progress of the runtime setup. So if we expand out the left hand bar and go to manage, we can select the integration runtime section, and there we go. It's currently set up and it's ready to go. Now then, obviously one of the things you need to do is to make sure that your package scripts to set up KingswaySoft and to retrieve a license, to make sure that they have worked. Now to do that, you basically need to go into your storage account. So here I'm going to swap over to the storage account here, use Storage Explorer. Now within the blob container that contained all of your installation scripts, you can see now that there's a folder. So this folder is created every time you stop and start the process, and if you open up the standard out.log file, it will actually tell you exactly how it got on. So here you can see it installed all of the toolkits without error. It's then also retrieved a trial license, in my case, with a license key, and it's got an expiry date and time. And then it's also at the bottom there, it's added in the appropriate credentials to be able to access the storage accounts from within the runtime itself. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to create a small sample Visual Studio project for the SSIS packages. So here we're going to create a new project and we're going to look for the integration. Now we're going to choose the Azure one. Now although I'm not necessarily using any of the specific inbuilt Azure functions within this package, it's for future benefit in case I do need that. So we're going to give it a project name, we're going to choose a location to save it, and we're going to create that project. That'll take a few moments to create. It's asking me if I want to connect to SSIS, but I'm not going to in this instance. And there's a few things that we want to set up initially within this project, so that we can manage it correctly within Azure. So by default, the protection level of the project is with a user key. Now obviously that's no good for multi-user setups or for deploying to the cloud. So what you do, you change it to encrypt sensitive data with password, you pop in a password here, and it means then that the entire project can be unencrypted with a single password. Once you've done that, you also will need to do it on every single package within the project as well. So you've got the properties for each package, you've got the same option for the protection level, choose the password. You'll have to re-enter the password every time, so obviously make sure it's the same as what you've chosen for the project level as well. So what we're going to do now is, as a sample, I've got a sample spreadsheet with a CSV file with a few contacts in. So I'm going to create a connection to that file, and it's just a CSV file, sample contacts. So if I select it here in the flat file connection manager, we can obviously see that the columns and the data that's in that system is there. So we hit OK. So that's now created our project level file connection, and then we're also going to create a Dynamics CRM connection in this instance. And what we're going to do, this pipeline is purely as a test. It's going to literally take the contents of that CSV file and import them as contacts within Dynamics. So I'm going to put the appropriate client app IDs and secrets in, just to create that connection to Dynamics. Type in the URL for the Dynamics environment. And then obviously we want to select which organization we want to use. It's going to ask me to log in and just authenticate. There we go, so there's our organization. We're going to test the connection. That worked fine. OK and OK. Now then, one thing we might want to do when we're developing to Azure is we may want to replace some of these properties. So things like the location of the files, the connections to Dynamics. Now the way you do that, you go into project parameters, you create a parameter called file path, for example, choose that as a string, and this allows you to input a variable, a value, so that we can save that within the system. Now we can also have different configurations as well. In this example we've got a development and we've got an Azure configuration, but we can have multiple. We could have one for test, production and so on. And when you add the parameters to that configuration, it allows you to save a different value per environment. So here we've got that file path parameter, and we can actually populate that with the appropriate values. So if we're working locally on our PC, we'll just want a local file path. So we can put that in there. Like so. And then if we need a different file path for when it's running in Azure, for example, we can obviously go into the Azure file storage. there's the same file there saved in the Storage Explorer, and we can paste that by changing the appropriate config, putting in the value. Now in this instance that's a URL, but what we want to do is actually put it as a UNC path. Now because we've added the credentials into that initial startup script, it means that we can actually access it directly using the UNC file formats. And then we can see we've got the different variables for each environment. This allows you to make sure that when you're building the project, you can obviously specify which configuration you want to build, which one you want to run, and you can keep those variables separate. Now then, to actually use those variables, what you would do is you'd go into your flat file connection and go to parameterize, and then you can choose which parameter to replace it with. So here we're choosing the connection string, which in the flat file connector is actually the path to the file. And you can see there it's now got a little FX symbol next to it, meaning that at runtime you can actually change those parameters and it will obviously pick up the appropriate file from whichever location you want. So next we're going to actually start building out a sample package. So we've just created a standard data flow and we're going to choose the flat file source format. Simply drag and drop from the toolbar. We can choose the flat file connection manager. We can make sure that the columns have been picked up correctly and so on. Hit OK. Then obviously now we want to create a dynamic CRM destination. So we add that in. We connect them up. And then we can configure the Dynamics connector so it uses the appropriate connection and the action. So we're going to create destination entity. We're going to just choose contacts in this case. We're just going to leave all of the default options, check the columns. As you can see, nothing's been mapped so far, so we're just going to scroll down to the appropriate email address field. I'm going to map that to the source, and then we're going to do the first name and the last name as well. So the idea of this package, it's simply going to read those CSV files and bring in the records and create contacts for them. So once that's done, we can do a save and we can check to make sure that there are currently no contacts in the dynamic system. So if we hit start, that's going to run. It'll only take a few seconds. It's found 4 rows, obviously that's 4 records of data. So once that's ran, we can now go back to Dynamics, do a refresh, and we can see that those have appeared. So that's running it locally. We've proven that the package works fine. I'm going to delete the contacts for the next test. And now we're ready to check this in to our DevOps environment. So this package is now in DevOps. If we go into DevOps now, we can see that it's there's all the files. We've just checked it in. It's got the bin folder, it's got the ispack folder, which is like sort of the runtime version of the package. So we're going to go into pipelines. We're going to create a new pipeline. We're going to choose the repository, and it's just going to be a starter pipeline for the moment. Now obviously this is using the normal the scripting style, the YAML pipeline. We're going to choose Azure CLI. We're going to create a connection to the appropriate Azure subscription. Now this inline script that I'm going to use, it's basically going to use the command az storage file upload batch. It's going to upload the build repository local path. So that's obviously the files for the packages, and it's going to upload them to the appropriate Azure storage. So what this means is that whenever you've done your developments, you can check in your changes and then have a pipeline run, which will then basically publish all of your packages into the Azure storage account file share, which the SSIS runtime will then pick up. It should be noted though that there are other ways of doing this. For example, you can connect Azure DevOps directly to the Data Factory, where you can use that to manage all of the the files and the build pipelines and so on. But this, for my first go at this, was a fairly straightforward way of handling it. So there you can see that it's basically uploading all of those files from DevOps into our Azure file storage area, our file share. So now if we go into our file share within the Storage Explorer, you can see that it's actually uploaded all of that information there. So we've now got the two runtimes, one for Azure and one for development. Now by default, obviously each one of those packages will have the appropriate parameters for their file location, which means that if you choose to run the Azure one, it will use the file location that points to the Azure file store. If you choose to run the development one, it will expect a local file and it'll probably fail in this instance. But what we're going to do, we're going to choose the Azure one. So within the Data Factory, within the author section, we're going to create a new pipeline. We're going to give it a name for sample SSIS. We're going to search for the execute SSIS package and then drag it onto our workspace. Within the execute SSIS package item, there's obviously various options you can choose. You can specify timeouts, but the main one is the settings, and so this is where you would choose which integration runtime to use. There are various other options for things like authentication and whether you need to use the 32-bit runtime. In this instance, we're going to use a file system project because we're going to actually reference the entire project, not just the package file. And we're going to choose in the options which file storage area we're going to choose. So here we've navigated to the SSIS packages. We're going to go into the Azure. I'm going to choose the ispac file. And then we're going to type in the package name that we're going to run within that ispac file as well. Now it's already popped in the domain and username and the password for the authentication to the file system. We'll also need to put in the encryption password. So this is the actual project level password that we set in the very beginning of creating our SSIS project. So we need to put that in so that we can actually access the information. And we're also going to choose a log file location as well. Now then, what we can also do at this stage is if we want to override any of the parameters that we've set up, we can do that here. So for example, the file path. Bearing in mind, obviously, when we run this within Azure, we may have very specific file paths, or we may want to change some of that information. So we can do that, put it in here, we can validate the package, and then we can obviously run it. So that's all being validated correctly. To run it, all you need to do really is click the debug option, and that will actually run the process. So here I'm going to just close down a few of the tabs so that it sees that it's queued. Now this particular package, because it's only a very simple one, it shouldn't take too long to actually start. It's currently got a status of queued. Now it's moved to in progress, and within a few moments it should actually be flagged as being succeeded. Now once it's actually run, you can see these little icons that appear for the output, and this ultimately gives you the actual result of it. So now that it's succeeded, we're going to go back into Dynamics, and if we do a refresh, you can see it's actually successfully ran. So that is the SSIS package that's ran in Azure SSIS within the cloud. Now then, to find out exactly what happened, so for debugging purposes or just to see the output of the actual run, you can go back into the storage account, go into Storage Explorer. If you look at the file shares, so wherever we've chosen to put those log files, there's a folder created with various log files here, and you simply can just double click one of them and it will allow you to download the file and view it. So you can see here it's as the usual SSIS lengthy log file message, but it has all the information that you need in there. So any other outputs that may have been produced, if it was a failed job, would be visible from there. Now, just to illustrate what would have happened if it failed for any reason, I'm just going to quickly change the name of the file here. So this will also prove that the overriding of those SSIS parameters is working as well. So we can hit debug there, and it will obviously start executing the package. And we can see there it's failed, and if we go there to the error message, you can see that it couldn't actually find that sample contacts2 file because it doesn't exist. So that proves that the overriding of the property worked, and obviously the error message was produced. Now, sometimes you may want to actually secure some of these values within an Azure Key Vault, just to make sure that all of your connection strings and your file paths and so on are secure. So here we're just going to basically create a Azure Key Vault. You can do that from within the Data Factory, and it'll actually pop out into another browser window where you can actually configure the Key Vault itself. So here we're just going to choose the appropriate subscription, the resource group. I'm going to pop it in the same resource group, give it a name, and obviously you choose the region. It's best to choose the same region as you've chosen for everything else as well. So we're going to create that Key Vault. It's going to perform its validations before creating it. It shouldn't take too long to do that. There you go. So we can go to the resource. Now this is where we can actually enter in our secure options. So here we're going to do one for the file path. Put in the value of the appropriate location. Obviously I'm going to take off the HTTPS and make it a UNC path as well. Click the create button, and that's our secret key created to store the version, the value of the file path. So now we can go back to the Data Factory, continue hooking up the Key Vault, create that, and then we can obviously select it from the list that we've just created, put in the secret name. So now we've attached the value of that file path to the Key Vault. Now we also need to make sure that we've given access to the Key Vault. So here I'm just going to add a quick access policy for the Key Vault for the data migration application. Save it. There we go. So now that's got access, and we can now go back into the package. We can now run it, and that should now run, but it will use the value that's within that Key Vault. So you can use that to override all of the parameters. So you can use it to override parameters for the connection string, any authentication, or any other parameters that you might need within your package. There we go, and that's now run as well. So that was a very quick introduction to using Azure SSIS in the cloud. I hope you found it useful. It was just a proof of concept I was doing. There's still a lot more to learn, but I certainly found it an interesting process to go through. Thanks for watching.